Welcome back, students. Now, in part 2, we will discuss about meaning, context and principal tenets of public choice approach. So, here after having some idea about in which context the public choice approach has emerged and also applied to different disciplines like political science and public administration, though it belongs to economics, now we will try to understand about the meaning and context. I have deliberately mentioned the context as plural because this theory is applied to different disciplines. So, according to the context, the meaning of public choice approach also will change. I repeat, according to the context, the meaning of public choice approach will also change. So, when you look at the meanings, as I told you that it has been applied not only to the academic field, but also to study political and administrative behaviors. Try to understand the terms clearly. When we use the word administrative behavior, what do you mean by that? So, remember the behaviors are measured through the decisions of the administration. Behaviors are also measured through the actions of the administration. Therefore, definitions will be according to the context. So, when you look at a definition given by Bachchan and co., it is understood that public choice theory or approach is a branch of economics that studies how economic decisions and policies are made in the government, applying the principles and methodologies of the economics to analyze the political decision making process. In a simple terms, though it looks very comprehensive and very what should I say comprehensive definition, but precisely what it says that when you are trying to apply economic models to understand the decision making in the government, it is nothing but public choice theory. Along with Bachchan's definition, there are other definitions also which will help us to understand the public choice approach in a clear cut manner. Public choice applies when it comes to the Dennis definition of a public choice approach. It says that public choice applies economic principles to political science, examining how self-interested voters, politicians and bureaucrats influence government actions and the policies. Similarly, here this definition clearly recognizes the important stakeholders in the decision making. They are voters, politicians and bureaucrats, and this definition also highlights the important concept called self-interest, and it argues that voters, politicians and bureaucrats, they all carry their own self-interest that results into the decision making in the government. Another important definition also is there given by William F. He says that public choice is concerned with the behavior of the voters, politicians and government officials as predominantly self-interested agents, and how these behaviors affect the collective decision making and resource allocation is the important thing to understand. So, more or less all these three definitions tries to highlight three important components. They are voters, politicians and bureaucrats, and how their self-interest shapes the decision making in the government also important to understand. So, usually when you look at the political science, when you look at the public administration, the factors that shape the decision making are different. Precisely speaking, when it comes to the all three definitions in relation to public choice approach, what we can realize is that all three definitions commonly focuses on three important components. They are voters, politicians and bureaucrats, and all three definitions also tries to highlight that these three individuals are the important factors are commonly carry what we call their own self interest. So, here there is nothing called altruism. So, try to remember that when it comes to public choice approach, it rejects the existence of altruism among all three important components: voters, politicians and bureaucrats. And also interestingly, there is an interesting sentence to understand about the entire public choice approach, and this is about when you talk about public choice approach, it is all about what? It talks about politics, it accepts that there exists politics, but they say that public choice theory fundamentally argues that politics without romance. So, we should not romanticize, we should not exaggerate, we should not look at the politics as a wholesome factor, but it is divided into multiple important stakeholders. So, and every stakeholders thinks about their own self interest. So, there is nothing called the group phenomenon, there is nothing called a common shared ideology, there is nothing called actually the state or the collective will or the greater good. It is all about the self interest of the individuals. So, what all these three definitions commonly focuses and recognizes that there exist individuals and all other factors comes later. So, to understand government's decisions, we need to look at the incentives and self interest of the individuals involved instead of the state as an entity. So, there are some principal tenets in relation to the what we call a public choice approach. So, these principal tenets are like this. Methodological individualism is considered as one of the important tenets in the public choice approach. What do you mean by methodological individualism? In other words, when you are trying to study the decision of the government, when you are trying to study the policy of the government or the law of the government or an action of the government, you need to take the individuals as a fundamental units to analyze the decision. In other words, social and political outcomes are explained by the actions of the individual actors, not by the public interest or the nation. It analyzes collective decisions by aggregating the choices made by the individual. In other words, every collective decision is the result of the aggregation of the individuals. Another important element is behavioral focus. So, how individuals' preferences, incentives and constraints shape the behavior of the government also important to understand. Another important element or what we call tenet is the politics as exchange. In other words, political decisions are modeled as exchanges where individuals trade voters, support and politics based on the personal benefits. I repeat again, when it comes to the politics as exchange, political decisions are modeled as exchanges where individuals trade votes, support and policies based on personal benefits. So, in other words, politics as exchange means individuals exchange and also political parties also do exchange. Exchange of what? Their self interest. Another important tenet is rational self interest. What do you mean by that? Individuals, whether voters, politicians or bureaucrats or interest groups, are assumed to act rationally to maximize their self interest. So, try to understand the term rational here. So, usually rational means scientific, rational means logic, but here when we are adding the word rational before self interest, the context will change. Rationality is about, note down, maximizing the self interest. Rationality is about maximizing the self interest. How do you maximize? In other words, if you look at the voter, they look at all political parties, all policy options that they are giving, or all party manifestos they came out with, and individuals will have an alternatives. Now, they have 3 or 4 alternatives and they look at the best one that tries to maximize their self interest. So, they go by that. So, is what we call rational here. So, rational is about picking the best one that gives more priority to the self interest of the individuals. This is in economic language is called homo economicus. I repeat, homo economicus is also known as economic man. So, economic man in rational self interest goes with man's self interest, goes with what is there, what is logical, what is existing in the numbers, not with the feelings, not with the beliefs, not with even the expectations, not even with the ideologies. So, in this context, rational self interest outrightly rejects the idea of ideology. Another important tenet in the public choice approach is the market logic applied to politics. Just as consumers as markets seek to maximize utility and firms seek to maximize profit, political actors seek to maximize votes and bureaucrats will try to maximize the budget and power, and the individuals will try to maximize their benefits. So, in other words, whether it is individual or a bureaucrat or a politician, how a consumer will try to get the best out in the market. Similarly, all also stakeholders will try to get they will try to maximize their benefits out of the situation. So, other key propositions in the public choice theory is, another important element is government failure. So, it also highlights that government can also fail. Similarly, another important concept that is exists in economics is about market failure. So, how market fails, government can also fail. At the same time, remember one thing, government failure is a proposition which is put forth by the public choice theory to counter the market failure. Try to understand in this way. In other words, when the market fails and market failure is obvious and common and it is acceptable thing, and also when the market fails, government intervention becomes inevitable. And when the government intervention becomes inevitable and when it is justified, similarly, when the government fails, then market intervention should be justified, is the principal argument of public choice approach. Another important aspect is bureaucratic budget maximization. Here it is argued that bureaucrats are not neutral public servants. I repeat, bureaucrats are supposed to be neutral servants, but in reality they are not. They seek to maximize their bureau's budget and size in terms of manpower, and also tries to enlarge budget in terms of the budget allegations, so that they can become more powerful, they can become more influential in the service. Another important argument is rational ignorance. So, this regarding rational ignorance we will discuss in the coming slides. Let us focus more on the rent seeking. Rent seeking is nothing but interest groups invest sources in terms of lobbying, influencing and manipulating the government. So, rent seeking is very important and influential factor in the decision making of the government. And when it comes to government failure, bureaucratic budget maximization and rent seeking, these are the things that comes out of the syllabus of the public administration, and it has to recognize, especially in terms of decision making. Thank you for listening.